The city had no name anymore. Whatever it had been called before the world ended no longer mattered. Tall buildings stood like tombstones against a gray sky, their windows shattered, their walls covered in years of rot and weather. Cars sat rusted in the middle of cracked roads, doors still open as though their owners had fled mid-step and never returned. There were no sirens, no helicopters, no distant sound of civilization trying to hold itself together. Just wind pushing through hollow corridors of concrete and glass, and beneath that wind a sound that never stopped. A low, wet groaning that came from everywhere and nowhere. The sound of the dead still walking. This was the world now. Not a battlefield, not a war zone. Something worse. A graveyard that refused to be still. And into this graveyard, two strangers arrived. The first came from the sky. A crack of light split the clouds above a collapsed overpass, and from it fell a figure encased in olive green armor. He hit the ground hard enough to crater the asphalt, one knee down, one fist pressed into the earth. His visor flickered with data streams as internal systems rebooted. Shield levels fluctuating, atmospheric readings unfamiliar. No Covenant signals, no on-SCI transmissions, nothing on any known frequency. Master Chief Petty Officer John 117 rose to his full height and stood in silence, scanning a world he did not recognize. His last memory was a Covenant ambush near a collapsing slip-space corridor. Now he stood on a dead street on what appeared to be Earth. But not his Earth. The air tasted wrong. The silence was too deep. And the bodies lying in the gutters were not fallen soldiers. They were civilians, some of them still twitching. Miles away, near the edge of a destroyed rail yard, the second stranger clawed his way out of rubble. Marcus Fenix coughed dust from his lungs and pulled himself upright, his Lancer assault rifle still gripped in one massive hand. His COG armor was scorched and dented. The last thing he remembered was the tunnels beneath Jacinto, a blinding flash, and then nothing. Now he stood in open air, surrounded by rusted trains and collapsed infrastructure. No locust, no swarm. No comms. He tried his earpiece and got nothing but static. Marcus spat blood and started walking. He did not know where he was, but he had survived worse mornings. It did not take long for either of them to find the locals. Master Chief detected movement 3 blocks east. His motion tracker showed dozens of slow-moving signatures converging on his position. When the first walker emerged from a doorway, arms outstretched, jaw hanging loose, Chief tilted his head slightly. He assessed it in under a second. No weapons, no coordination, minimal threat. He sidestepped its lunge and drove his fist through its skull with the ease of crushing a dry leaf. Then came the next one, and the next. Within minutes, the street was littered with collapsed bodies. Chief moved through them like a machine, because that is what he was trained to be. Marcus encountered his first horde near the rail yard. A mass of stumbling, groaning corpses poured from a collapsed warehouse. Marcus did not hesitate. He revved the chainsaw bayonet on his Lancer and walked straight into them. Flesh and bone split apart in wet arcs as he carved a path through the horde with the same ferocity he had brought to every battlefield he had ever stood on. He did not flinch. He did not slow down. When the last walker dropped, Marcus stood in a circle of destruction and looked around at the world with hard eyes. He had seen civilizations fall before. He recognized the smell. Their paths converged 3 hours later in the middle of a freeway overpass buried under a massive swarm of undead. Chief saw the muzzle flash first, then heard the roar of a chainsaw that should not exist in any modern arsenal. Marcus saw the glint of green armor moving through the horde with impossible speed. Neither man spoke at first. They fought back to back until the last walker fell. Then they stood in the silence and looked at one another. 2 soldiers, 2 wars, 2 universes. Neither understood how they had arrived, but both understood exactly what surrounded them. A world that had already lost. For the first hour they did not talk much. Soldiers rarely do when the situation is still unfolding. They moved through the city in a loose formation, Chief on point, Marcus covering their 6. It was instinct. Neither had to explain it. War had trained them in the same language, even if their wars had been fought in entirely different galaxies. But as the hours passed and the silence stretched on, both men began to understand something that unsettled them more than any enemy ever had. There was no war here. There were no armies, no command structures, no battle line, No enemy capitals to siege or objectives to secure. Just an endless, shapeless collapse. The dead walked, the living hid, and the world rotted slowly between the two. Master Chief had fought genocidal alien empires and ancient parasitic horrors. Marcus had fought underground monsters and planet-wide extinction events. Both men had been built by conflict, sharpened by it, defined by it. But this was not conflict. This was erosion. The slow wearing down of everything human until nothing remained but bone and rust. Chief processed it tactically. He cataloged every intersection, every viable rooftop, every building that could serve as a defensible position. His suit ran constant environmental scans, mapping a perimeter that expanded with every block they cleared. He moved like a system, cold and precise, turning chaos into data. Marcus processed it differently. He kicked open doors and checked rooms the old-fashioned way. If something moved, he killed it. If something was useful, he took it. He found canned food in an apartment kitchen and shoved it into a bag without stopping. He found a dead man in a bathtub who had turned weeks ago, and he put the walker down with the butt of his rifle without blinking. Marcus did not need a heads-up display. He had instincts that had been sharpened across decades of unbroken warfare. And somehow these two very different methods worked in perfect parallel. When they cleared a small hardware store to rest for the night, they finally spoke. Chief laid out what he had gathered. The infected showed no signs of tactical awareness. They responded to sound and movement but demonstrated no strategic behavior. The infrastructure collapse appeared to be years old. There was no evidence of organized military response anywhere within scanning range. Marcus leaned against a wall and cleaned his lancer. He said it's simpler. Everyone is dead or hiding, and the things out there are not smart enough to be real enemies. The real question is where the living are and whether any of them are worth finding. It was in that moment that their partnership became something more than convenience. Chief had the technology and the precision. Marcus had the raw instinct and the willingness to act without hesitation. One was a scalpel. The other was a sledgehammer. And in a world where both surgery and brute force were needed to survive, they completed each other. They set watches that night. Chief took first shift because his augmented body required far less rest. Marcus slept with his rifle across his chest, one eye never fully closed. Outside, the dead wandered past the barricaded windows, groaning, bumping against walls, moving without purpose or memory. The sound filled the darkness like a lullaby written by the end of the world. And in that small room, surrounded by a dead civilization they had never known, two soldiers from distant wars began to understand their mission. There was no command giving them orders. There was no extraction coming. There was only the world in front of them and whatever they chose to do with it. Chief stared at the ceiling and ran calculations no one would ever read. Marcus sharpened a blade he had found under the counter. Neither man said it out loud, but both had already decided. They were not going to just survive this world. They were going to fix it. They found the survivors on the third day. A small group, barely a dozen, huddled inside a barricaded church on the outskirts of the city. A few men too thin and too tired to fight. They flinched when the door opened. They screamed when they saw the armor. It took several minutes before anyone believed that Chief and Marcus were not there to hurt them. A woman who seemed to lead the group finally spoke. Her voice was flat and hollow, the voice of someone who had stopped expecting anything good. She told them the walkers were not the real danger. Not anymore. People had learned to avoid the dead. You stay quiet, you stay alive, but there was something you could not avoid. That was what the survivors called the militia that controlled the region. A group of armed men who had organized early in the collapse and built their power on fear. They raided settlements, took supplies, took people. Anyone who resisted was made into an example. The woman did not describe what that meant, but the look in her eyes said everything. Marcus stood by the window and listened with a jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He had seen this before. Stranded humans turning on one another while the real enemy closed in around them. It disgusted him then. It disgusted him now. His response was immediate. Point me to them. Chief raised a hand. Not yet. He wanted to understand the full picture. How many were in the militia? What weapons they carried? How far their territory extended? Rushing into an unknown enemy's stronghold without intelligence was how soldiers died, even soldiers like them. Marcus did not like waiting. He never had. But he respected the logic even if his blood ran hot against it. For 2 days they gathered information. Chief sent surveillance drones from his armor systems to map the surrounding area. Marcus went on foot, scouting trails and ambush points the way he had done in the ruins of Sira. The picture that formed was grim. The Reapers operated from a fortified compound roughly 10 miles north. They had vehicles, weapons, and enough manpower to bully every survivor group within a 50-mile radius. They were organized just enough to be dangerous and cruel enough to keep everyone in line. The decision was eventually made for them. On the 5th day, a Reaper patrol found the church. Chief and Marcus were out scouting when the attack happened. By the time they returned, the barricade had been smashed open. Supplies were gone. 2 of the men had been beaten unconscious. A young woman had been dragged away. Marcus stood in the wreckage and said nothing for a long time. Then he picked up his lancer and looked at Chief. Chief looked back. His visor revealed nothing, but his silence said everything. There was no more debate, no more waiting, no more gathering intelligence. The Reapers had made themselves the enemy, and these 2 soldiers had spent their entire lives doing one thing to enemies: ending them. Marcus checked his ammunition and started walking north. Chief followed. Behind them, the survivors watched from the broken doorway of the church. They did not call out. They did not try to stop them. They simply watched 2 warriors walk toward a fight that no one in this world had been strong enough to start. And for the first time in a very long time, something stirred in their hollow chests. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The compound sat on what had once been a large industrial park. Chain-link fencing had been reinforced with concrete barriers and scrap metal. Guard towers built from welded steel rose at each corner, manned by armed sentries with rifles and floodlights. Inside, rows of repurposed shipping containers served as barracks, storage, and cells. Vehicles were parked in a central motor pool, fueled and maintained. The perimeter was patrolled on a regular rotation. From a distance, it almost looked like civilization. But it was not civilization. It was control wearing the mask of order. Chief and Marcus spent an entire night observing from a wooded ridge overlooking the compound. Chief used his armor's enhanced optics to catalog every detail. Number of guards, shift change intervals, blind spots in the lighting, structural weak points in the fencing, fuel storage locations. He identified 3 separate entry corridors and 2 potential exit routes. His mind worked like a war machine because that is exactly what it was. Marcus watched with different eyes. He did not count rotations or measure angles. He watched how the guards moved. He watched their posture, their confidence, the way they shoved prisoners between containers. He recognized the body language of men who had grown comfortable with cruelty. Men who had not been challenged in so long they had forgotten what a real fight looked like. Good, Marcus thought. Comfortable men die easy. When they pulled back to plan, their approaches collided in the most productive way possible. Chief laid out a tactical framework. He proposed a 2-phase assault. Phase 1 would involve disabling the compound's generators to kill their lights and communications. Phase 2 would be a coordinated breach from opposite sides, forcing the defenders to split their attention. He identified the fuel depot as a potential ignition point to create chaos and draw guards away from the prisoner area. Marcus agreed with the broad strokes but added his own layer. He wanted noise, real noise, the kind that makes men panic and forget their training. He suggested using the walker population as an additional weapon. If they breached the perimeter fencing on the eastern wall and created enough sound, the dead would flood into the compound from the surrounding woods. The Reapers would be fighting on 2 fronts before they even knew what hit them. Chief paused. It was an unorthodox variable. Introducing an uncontrollable element into a tactical operation went against every protocol he had been trained on. But he also recognized the brutal efficiency of it. In this world, the dead were not just a threat, they were a resource. He agreed. They spent the next day preparing. Chief rigged small explosive charges using materials from his suit's emergency fabrication systems. Marcus reinforced his lancer and scavenged additional ammunition from a collapsed National Guard outpost they found 2 miles south. They moved with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this 100 times in 100 different wars. That night, they returned to the survivors at the church. Chief explained the plan in clear, simple terms. He did not sugarcoat it. There would be gunfire. There would be explosions. People would die. But when it was over, the Reapers would be gone. Marcus said less. He told them to stay inside, stay quiet, and wait. One of the older men asked if they really thought 2 people could take down an entire compound. Marcus looked at him and said, "We are not 2 people. We are 2 armies." Nobody argued. At 0300 hours the following morning, Master Chief and Marcus Fenix moved out under a sky choked with clouds. The compound glowed faintly in the distance, its floodlights cutting pale circles into the dark. Sentries paced their towers. Guards smoked cigarettes by the gate. Inside, the Reapers slept with the confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. They had never met anything like what was coming. Chief reached his position at the eastern perimeter and placed his charges along the base of the reinforced fencing. Marcus circled wide to the western side, his lancer silent against his back, a scavenged shotgun in his hands for the close work that was about to come. Both men waited. The compound breathed in the dark, unaware. Somewhere in the trees, the dead shuffled and groaned, drawn slowly toward the faint sound of generators humming behind concrete walls. Chief placed his hand on the detonator. Marcus tightened his grip on the shotgun, and the night held its breath. The first explosion tore the eastern fence apart like paper. A wall of orange flame climbed into the sky and turned the darkness into flickering daylight. The shock wave rattled every container in the compound and knocked 2 sentries off their tower platforms. Alarms erupted. Floodlights swung wildly. Men stumbled out of barracks half-dressed, grabbing weapons with shaking hands. And then the dead came. Through the shattered eastern fence, drawn by the explosion like moths to a bonfire, walkers poured in by the dozens. They came from the tree line in a slow, relentless tide, arms reaching, jaws grinding. The first Reaper guard to meet them fired 6 rounds before they pulled him to the ground and tore him apart. His screams echoed across the compound and sent a wave of terror through every man within earshot. Chaos took hold. And chaos was exactly what Marcus Fenix lived for. He breached the western wall with a shotgun blast that removed the lock and half the gate. He walked through the smoke like something out of a nightmare, lancer roaring, chainsaw teeth spinning. The first 3 guards who tried to stop him did not get the chance to raise their weapons. Marcus moved through them the way a storm moves through a wheat field. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Just the cold, violent arithmetic of a man who had been killing monsters since before these men learned how to hold a gun. On the eastern side, Master Chief moved with a different kind of destruction. Where Marcus was thunder, Chief was silence. He slipped through the chaos like a shadow cast by the flames. His motion tracker painted every hostile in blue, and he eliminated them one by one with precise efficiency. A guard on a rooftop dropped without a sound. A squad forming a firing line near the motor pool scattered when their leader collapsed with a single round through his visor. Chief did not waste ammunition. He did not waste movement. Every action was calculated to remove the most dangerous targets first and let the chaos handle the rest. And the chaos was handling plenty. Walkers now filled the eastern quarter of the compound, and they were spreading. Reapers who had trained to bully unarmed survivors found themselves surrounded by enemies that did not negotiate, did not flinch, and did not stop. Gunfire erupted in every direction as discipline collapsed. Men shot at walkers, shot at shadows, and sometimes shot at each other in the confusion. In the center of the compound, the Reaper leader tried to rally his forces. He stood on the bed of a truck and screamed orders into the noise. Regroup. Hold the line. Push them back. For a brief moment, his men started to listen. A cluster of fighters began forming around the truck, rifles pointed outward, creating a pocket of resistance. Marcus saw it. He changed direction and charged straight for the truck. Chief saw it too. He dropped from a container roof and flanked right. The Reaper leader saw Marcus coming and opened fire. Bullets sparked off COG armor as Marcus lowered his shoulder and kept moving. He hit the truck like a freight train, flipping the vehicle onto its side and sending the leader crashing into the dirt. Before the man could stand, Marcus was on him, one hand on his collar, one fist raised. He did not need to throw it. The look in Marcus Fenix's eyes was enough to break whatever was left of the man's authority. Chief arrived and neutralized the remaining fighters around the truck with 4 shots in under 2 seconds. Clean. With their leader down and their defenses shattered, the Reapers broke. Some fled into the night. Some dropped their weapons and surrendered. Some were not fast enough to escape the walkers still flooding through the eastern breach. Marcus stood over the fallen leader and looked across the burning compound. Flames danced against the low clouds. Walkers stumbled through the wreckage, already losing interest as the noise died down. Survivors who had been held captive emerged from shipping containers, blinking into the firelight with faces that did not yet understand what had happened. Chief moved to secure the prisoner area. He broke locks with his bare hands and guided people out of the smoke with calm, steady commands. His voice never rose. His movements never rushed. He was the wall between the living and the dead, and he held that line without a single crack. By the time the sun rose, the compound was quiet. The reapers were gone. The walkers had been cleared or drawn back into the surrounding woods by diversionary charges Chief had planted as contingencies. And in the middle of the wreckage, surrounded by freed survivors and smoldering ruins, two soldiers stood side by side and said nothing. They did not need to. The battle was over. The living had won. In the days that followed, something extraordinary began to happen. Something that this world had nearly forgotten was possible. People started building, not just barricades, not just traps. They started building a future. The compound, despite its scars, was structurally sound. The walls still held. The generators still worked. The storage containers once used as cells were cleaned out and repurposed into shelters. Survivors from the church and from the compound's own captives came together in the wreckage and began to clear it. Piece by piece, like archaeologists uncovering the bones of a civilization they intended to resurrect. Master Chief took command of the structural effort without anyone asking him to. It was simply what he did. He assessed the remaining defenses, sealed the eastern breach with reinforced barricades, and established overlapping fields of observation from the guard towers. He organized supply inventories, water collection systems, and designated safe zones within the perimeter based on structural integrity scores only his armor could calculate. He created patrol schedules. He assigned watch rotations. He built order from the same ground that had only ever known fear. And the survivors followed him, not because he demanded it, but because for the first time in years, someone was showing them a way forward that did not require cruelty. Marcus took a different role. He trained them, not gently. Marcus Fenix had never done anything gently in his life. He stood in the dirt yard of the compound and taught anyone willing to hold a weapon how to fight, how to move, how to watch each other's backs. He was blunt and rough, and sometimes his voice carried across the entire settlement like a drill sergeant forged in a furnace. But he never asked anyone to do something he would not do first. And when a young man dropped his weapon in fear during a walker encounter at the perimeter, Marcus did not yell at him. He picked the weapon up, handed it back, and told him that fear is fine as long as your hands still work. Slowly, the settlement changed. Walls grew stronger. People walked taller. Children who had not laughed in months were heard playing between the containers, while adults worked nearby with purpose in their movements instead of just survival. For Marcus, it reminded him of the early days after Emergence Day, when humanity had been beaten to its knees and the first COG outposts were established, not as military bases, but as places where people could simply be human again. He had fought for those places then. He would fight for this one now. For Chief had stirred something quieter. He had spent his entire existence protecting humanity from threats too large for normal people to face. He had done it from behind a visor that hid everything he felt. But standing in this small, scarred settlement, watching ordinary people choose to rebuild instead of surrender, he understood the mission more clearly than he ever had. It was never about the weapons. It was never about the armor or the augmentations or the technology. It was about giving people enough safety to remember who they were. And here, in a world overrun by the dead, that mission mattered more than it ever had before. The settlement was not perfect. Resources were thin. Walkers still pressed against the walls at night. Trust between strangers was fragile and slow. But it was real. It was growing. And it was held together by two men who had carried the weight of entire civilizations on their shoulders and had never once put it down. One evening, Marcus sat on the wall and watched the sun set over the tree line. Chief stood beside him in silence. Neither man smiled, but neither man needed to. The work spoke for itself. They left on a Tuesday morning, though no one in the settlement kept track of days anymore. Master Chief secured his weapons and ran a final diagnostic on his armor. Every system was nominal. Every reading was stable. He had uploaded a complete tactical guide into a portable terminal and left it with the settlement's newly appointed watch commander. It contained defensive protocols, emergency procedures, and enough strategic data to keep the compound operational for months without him. Marcus slung his lancer over his shoulder and said goodbye the only way he knew how. He looked at the people gathered at the gate, nodded once, and started walking. No speeches, no promises. Just the quiet acknowledgement that he had done what he came to do, and now there was more world out there that needed the same. The survivors watched them go. A few of the children waved. One of the older women wiped her eyes. The young man Marcus had trained stood at the gate with a rifle held properly for the first time, his back straight, his eyes clear. Nobody tried to stop them. Everybody understood. These two were not settlers. They were not leaders. They were something older and something harder to name. They were the kind of men that the world only produces when everything else has failed. The ones who walk toward the fire when everyone else is running away. The road stretched out ahead of them, broken and overgrown, winding through forests where the dead still wandered between the trees. There were more settlements out there. More survivors hiding in churches and basements and boarded-up schools, living half-lives in the shadow of extinction. And there were more enemies too. More men like the Reapers who had confused power with strength and cruelty with leadership. Chief and Marcus did not talk about what came next. They did not need to. The road would show them. Behind them, the settlement grew smaller against the horizon, but it did not disappear. It held. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Voices carried on the wind. A wall stood where there had once been nothing but open ground and fear. In the weeks that followed, other survivor groups began to hear stories. Whispered accounts of two armored strangers who had appeared out of nowhere and destroyed the most feared militia in the region. A silent guardian in green who moved like a machine and spoke like a general. A scarred giant with a roaring blade who fought as though the apocalypse was just another Tuesday. The stories spread from camp to camp, growing with each telling, becoming something larger than the men themselves. Because that is what the world needed now. Not just walls and weapons and food. It needed proof that strength still existed. That someone, somewhere, was still fighting for the living. And out on the broken highway, walking side by side into an uncertain horizon, two soldiers carried that proof on their shoulders the way they always had. In duty. Forever forward.